Hello. Just wait a couple of minutes and give some people time to arrive before we get into the presentation. Let's get set up. Hello, everyone arriving. Good to see you all. Off in a minute, just give people time to get set up and join. Welcome, everyone. Just 30 more seconds and we'll get going. Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. This is the first of a series of webinars around JSM Unleashed that will be hosted by Elegance Group. And today's webinar, we've got Mark Edwards joining us to give you a sneak preview into, or an exclusive preview into Data Manager, one of the upcoming recent features for JSM assets. JSM Unleashed is a series of webinars and events that Elegance Group will be providing to give you a look at some of the unique solutions that we have implemented around Jira Service Management. Jira Service Management is one of our favorite tools, and Data Manager in particular is going to be really great for many of you on the call who already have Premium, because it will be a free additional feature for you. So it's great for you to kind of get this look in and how you can start applying that as soon as you have access. So the agenda for today, it's just a half-hour webinar. I will be talking to you in a moment about an offer from Elegance Group for exclusive attendees today. We'll then go into presentation by Mark, the Principal Partner Solution Architect at Atlassian. Then we'll have some time for Q&A, and then we will close around 10 a.m. Sydney time, 12 p.m. New Zealand time, but we may run over a little bit if there's still questions that people have burning that we can answer for you. Throughout the presentation, you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's a Q&A section. You can start asking your questions, so typing them in. We've also got Brett Selliers, who will be on the call, who is Elegance Group's founder and evangelist, and he'll be able to answer some of those questions for you as we go. We'll also select some of those questions to answer live at the end by Mark, and I'm sure it'll be a great presentation for you all. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, Elegance Group is a Platinum Solution Partner, ITSM and Cloud Specialized, and we started in 2020 around COVID times, and as I've kind of mentioned, Atlassian is our love and our passion. It is what drives us. Our slogan is solving curly business problems and thinking differently about the usage of Atlassian tooling. Data Manager is one of those features that we are keen to help you guys understand more about. And at the end of today, feel free to take advantage of this offer where you will have a couple of hours with one of our senior consultants to deep dive and understand your current situation with assets, how you're utilizing it, how you might be able to actually clean that up, optimize that, improve that, and how then Data Manager could be of use of you as that starts being rolled out. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Mark to dive into the detail of Data Manager.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Kirsty. Let me just quickly share my screen. All right, you should be able to see that now. So yes, listen, thanks. Just wanted to thank Kirsty and Brett and Darren for inviting me along to talk to you today on assets or Atlassian's approach to asset management. And it is specifically around data manager, but obviously data manager forms part of our assets or our CMDB within JSM. So it's forming part of a real, a good story we have around asset management. And I'll take you through some of that. Sometimes I can speak for quite a bit on this. I like to talk about it. I love to talk about JSM. I'm quite passionate about it. So I'll just start a timer just to make sure I try and keep to time. A little bit about myself. Like Kirsty said, I am a solution architect, specifically helping partners and in turn our customers. So, there's a huge amount of new features, new benefits that come with our products as we develop our products. And as we also purchase or acquire different companies and actually integrate it into our platform. And I try and, assist our partners and our customers to understand the features and the benefits to those features that as we introduce them. So that's my primary objective. And I specifically work with ITSM specialized partners as well, like Elegance Group. All right, so I'll quickly get into it. All right, so in terms of what I've seen with customers when I speak to customers, and this also comes from experience. I worked for banks for a very, very long time, big banks. And if you look at one of the biggest challenges that generally comes with having lots of data, is that data is everywhere. You don't have one source of data. There are so many different places that data exists within an organization, especially an enterprise organization, and being able to understand where that data is and then actually consolidate that data, can be very time consuming and actually can be very hard. If you look at all the different ways that, as IT has progressed over the last 20 years, especially when you look at cloud and hybrid cloud and all of SaaS, it's actually becoming more difficult, not easier, right? So that's one of the biggest things that we find when I speak to customers. So yeah, one of the big things though is that, and one thing I really find with customers when they start pulling data into a CMDB is that one of the things that happens over time, it's not necessarily initially, because initially you might have this really nice CMDB and you bring in one or two data sources. But over time, what tends to happen is that the CMDB data really becomes stale. And, like I said, sort of saying here, you end up with a bit of garbage in that CMDB, or what we call assets. And that's one thing that you really don't want, because if people start to distrust the data that you have within your CMDB, that's when people start to not use it. So as soon as there's no trust, it becomes a real issue, because really what you want to be able to do is surface that data into different places, right? And specifically within your ITSM tool and your ESM tool as you start to grow. So that's one of the reasons why we purchased a company called AirTrack. So they were actually an Australian company that were working with quite a few large banks. And it's now been renamed Assets Data Manager. So Assets Data Manager is fundamentally part of Assets. So you get it with JSM Premium and JSM Enterprise, and it's provided, I want to call it free of charge. This was a product that many banks were actually purchasing as a separate entity or a separate piece of software that was being used with their incumbent CMDB solutions. And we're providing it as intrinsic of both Premium and Enterprise. So it really adds a lot of value with the fact that, you're getting this for free, right? It's something that you can use. It enhances our existing assets capability, which is already, enterprise grade and very, very good, but it really does enhance that. So how does it work in essence? Basically, the way I like to try and explain this is that it becomes kind of like a staging area for your data. So what tends to happen, and if you look at the existing way we pull data into assets, what tends to happen is that you have these different data sources, you pull them into different schemas inside assets, and you will end up with, in assets, with a lot of duplicate data. So if you pull data from SCCM and you pulled it from Entra ID on, say, compute, you would end up with lots of different, a schema with the same laptop name in different schemas, as an example. And then you'll also end up with the data, because different data sources call things different, or pieces of data different things, because that comes from different vendors, as an example. You will end up with this data sitting in different schemas, and then also it's not the same data, it looks different. So the way I try to explain it is that Data Manager is essentially like a staging area for data. You pull data into Data Manager from all these different data sources, you cleanse the data, you normalize the data, you reconcile the data, and then what hopefully you end up with is a complete, a current, and a correct data set that you can push into JSM assets. That's the idea. So hopefully what you would end up with is a schema with, for example, a compute schema with accurate compute data on your laptops, desktops, or servers. And that data then you can surface within JSM. So that's the idea. So if you look at this in a little bit more detail, and this, I like to, and Atlassian likes to kind of explain things in threes. So I'll explain this in threes. The first thing is we want to simplify data ingestion. Many of our customers have, especially enterprise customers, already do have a huge amount of data in their environment. So if you forget about just doing discovery, like JSM assets discovery, you already have in your environment different tools that have a lot of this data. So as an example, if you're doing software asset management or license management, you may already have Flexera or Snow. If you've got, most customers have Entra ID, which will have users, groups, computers already in that database. So these are existing data sources that you can actually start to use to now pull into Data Manager. So we've got around 30 adapters that came by default with the AirTrack acquisition, and those are being rolled out as we go. So something I also forgot to mention was that the Assets Data Manager is actually already in a beta form within JSM, and all our customers already have it, so you can already use it. There is a limitation at the moment on the number of adapters. I think it's around 12 or 15, I can't remember exactly, but as we test these adapters, we're releasing them. And we're also looking at releasing a way for our partners and our customers to actually build custom adapters, but we'll go through some of the ways you can actually pull in data in a separate slide I've got. And then what you can also do is start to automate this data ingestion. So you want to automate as much as possible this. So it may be that you pull this data in once a week, or it could be every day, depending on how often you think the data is refreshed. So we're providing this ability to now pull this data in automated ways. You can also consolidate data sources. So as an example, if, for example, you're a really big organization and you have multiple versions of Entra ID for different departments or maybe different divisions, you can actually consolidate that data into one data source as well. So the first thing is we want to be able to simplify the data ingestion. The second thing is we want to be able to deliver reliable data. So many data sources will have stale type data. It might be because, for example, in Entra ID or Microsoft SCCM, there may be laptops that have been decommissioned. Someone's left, maybe they took that laptop with them and they never returned it. No one ended up removing it from Entra ID or SCCM. So you end up with data that might not exist in different data sources. But also you have data that exists, for example, and it's interesting that the use case with this, but where you've got it within, for example, your antivirus. So antivirus actually have, because it's scanning compute resources, it actually has a list of all those compute resources that it's actually scanning. So the idea is to be able to have a look at all of this data, compare it, and work out whether you think that this specific record, say, for example, it's a laptop, see that whether it exists in different data sources, but also see where it may not exist. Okay, and eventually what you would end up doing is creating this golden record based on what you think the reliable data is. And there's a whole lot of analytics in the back of Data Manager that really simplifies this approach for you. And then what you can do is then push this data into what we call the golden record. As I explained, the golden record is something that you want within your CMDB or within JSM assets that then you can use within JSM for different use cases. And the third option, or the third thing that we're really getting out of Data Manager is, for example, the optimization of processes. So we want actionable insights. So because we've actually come up with all these different data sources that we've got, and a good use case I always explain is you may have your virus scan department or your security department that's running virus scan or different vulnerability type scans. They will have an audit requirement to make sure that they're actually doing all of this. You can actually provide actionable insights to them to be able to have a look at that data and say, okay, we can see that these different, say, for example, a laptop exists in 3 or 4 different data sources, but it doesn't exist. We can see that we're not actually scanning this asset for virus scan. So you can create an actionable insight report that you will send then to your virus scan or your security department to actually go and fix this. You can also provide customizable dashboards for your security department if that's what you wanted to do. And then you can start to create flexible filtering, that this flexible filtering can then be used to create your golden record. So in terms of use cases, and this will depend on what you're currently using, for example, JSM, or what your different business teams are actually doing with some of the data that they require. But the idea is we want this data to be both complete, current, and correct. So I'll quickly go through some of these use cases. I think they should be fairly self-explanatory in a way. But the better data we have within JSM for specifically service management use cases, you want to be able to log incidents against different CIs. For example, if you're logging an incident and there's an incident on a server, you want to be able to have the correct server name, the correct details around that attribute and that CI that you can log have really good incident management. And that allows you to then pull reports at a later stage. And also, if you look at SLAs on incidents or request management, you're able to provide really decent SLAs because you know exactly which asset may be a more priority asset that you would say, right, this asset is something that is involved in a really critical business service. We know about that asset. We know it's a complete and quality asset in the CMDB, and we want to use that within maybe a change or release management process. So those are your typical IT use cases. Then you can look at, in terms of the asset and configuration management and also DevSecOps, governance and compliance, those use cases where, for example, those auditing, as I already suggested, from an auditing perspective, there's a huge amount that needs to be done by the security department. And that relies on reliable data. And you can, if you get this right and you start to use Data Manager with assets, you can start to produce these reports for your security and compliance teams. So, it really provides this ability to provide not just an IT use case, but also an audit and governance and compliance use case that you can start to really assist many of these business teams and also other IT and security teams. Then if you move away from just IT and you start to look at, and this is something that JSM is really, really good at, is looking at enterprise service management use cases. So HR and marketing and finance. And if you move away from just the IT, you can start to bring in a lot of these use cases and this data into Data Manager and assets, and then be able to use it for example, financial reporting, for forecasting and planning, inventory and procurement. So provide these to those business teams to be able to have quality data, and that's the idea, right? To have really, really quality data and use that within their normal business practice. So just another slide on the data manager connectors, because I think this is quite important, just to have an overview of this. And also I just wanted to touch on the adapters that you can see at the top left-hand side. So flat files, we can pull in flat files like CSVs. We know that many business teams are still using Excel and CSV, so we want to be able to pull in those data sources as well, so you can do that. But also what I'm finding is we're getting a lot of use cases around SQL. So we have a SQL connector as well. So you may have we might not have a connector for a specific piece of software or a specific use case, but many times the actual data source of that is SQL. So you can create a SQL, you can use our SQL adapter to be able to pull that data in as well. All right, so just another way of kind of looking at the data, and I had a brief sort of picture of this a little bit earlier, but the idea is if you look at the computer names and you look at how you've got your data spread across the different adapters or the different data sources, you can now really start to compare that data. And I'll go through some of the tips and tricks a little bit later on what I would suggest on how you look at adapters, but we'll have a look at that just now. All right, so as you start to bring in the data as well, all those different data sources will have different attributes assigned to them. So you can start to correlate that data into one data record, which, like I said, is the golden record. So as you consolidate all of those attributes can then be pushed into assets. The filtering, I did touch on the filtering, but within Data Manager, you don't even have to use the reports out of assets, but Data Manager actually has its own reporting type mechanism. So you can actually, it's very, very easy to use. It's just you don't need to know SQL to be able to do this. You can actually use just a GUI-based, condition-based advanced searching, and start to pull these different reports. And those reports can then be pulled into dashboards as well. So it might be, having a look at, as an example I've got over here, the antivirus, and looking at some of the Windows desktops that, for example, are appearing in Data Manager or appearing in the data source over time. So we also track, as we're bringing in the data, say, for example, every week, we also track the trending of that data. So you can actually start to see, well, if you start to do actionable insights, how is that improving? As you send a report to the security department and they start fixing some of those issues, are you seeing that in over time? Are you seeing that the number of antivirus that didn't exist, is it reducing over time? And touching on something that I talked about a little bit earlier around actionable insights, one thing we are looking at, this is not available at the moment, but one thing the team is looking at is being able to create automatic JSM tickets out of this data to be able to push tickets to, for example, the antivirus team to say, we've picked up an asset that does not have antivirus, so please go and have a look at this, you need to fix it. You could put an SLA on that, which is always really important, so that people know how much time you think they need to be able to fix this. But now you can start to track some of these actionable insights. Not just sending them a report, you actually want them to actually go and action it. So that's some of the things, the ways we're kind of looking at how we can use this data within JSM as well. And then in turn, if you look at the way you can use automation in JSM, you could actually create a ticket and then actually kick off an automation to potentially push the antivirus to a workstation. So actually not just sending a report or sending a ticket, but actually fixing the issue over time. So that's the idea behind it eventually. So just quickly, some tips and tricks after chatting with quite a few customers on this. One is, have a look at what problem you're trying to solve. So have a look at how you're using your data at the moment within JSM or whichever tool you're using at the moment. And define what you think the use case is, because I think that's really important, right? Find out what problem you're really trying to solve. So that's A. B is understand what data you have in your environment. And this is where, for example, Kirsty alluded to you know, if you've on this webinar, you can use some consulting type time with, for example, Brett, to come in and have a look at your environment. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity to use some of Brett's expertise as an example, to have a look at the data sources that you currently have, evaluate them, document them, and then look at which ones you want to bring in. And this goes on to my third sort of tip, and that is you can start slowly. Don't look at it as a big bang approach to, you know, getting all your data in and that it has to be perfect. Because Data Manager is a staging environment, you don't have to push all your data straight to assets. You can actually pull it into the staging area and put it in slowly. So you might start with 1 or 2 data sources and just play with the data. It's going to take time to understand what data you have, understand the requirements to be able to pull that data in, because there will be, for example, you will need to set up maybe the you know, the user account that Data Manager is going to use to pull the data out of that data source. But the idea is to start slowly and then to iterate. So as you then pull in more data sources, then look at, right, now I've really got a good set of data in Data Manager. And now what I'm going to do is iterate. I'm going to bring in more data sources if need be, and then I'm going to start pushing it to Data Manager. We are, as part of the beta for Data Manager, you can pull in data with the CSVs using our CSV import into JSM assets. But in January, we are also releasing an automated feature to be able to take data from Data Manager and automatically push it into assets. So what I would suggest is start using Data Manager now. It's not going to break anything within JSM. You can really start to use it, and even if you gain insights into where you could be able to use the data for the use cases, but also just to have a look at how accurate you think your current data sources are and provide feedback to the teams who own the data source. Like, really start to use it. You know, use it in anger. It's not going to hurt anything within in your environment. And then you can look at pushing it into assets at a later stage as you start to become familiar with Assets Data Manager. So that's what I would suggest. All right, I think I'm basically on time, Kirsty. So we can open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We've got a couple of questions already, both from Hamish. Thank you, Hamish. The first one being regarding typical customer profiles. What would a common DMARC for beneficial feature sets be between Data Manager and something like Device 42?
All right, so that's actually a great question. Device 42 is very specifically and JSM Assets Discovery is very much a discovery product. It goes out and it discovers things on your network. That's one of the primary things. If you look at not just Device 42, but also Landsweeper, they go out and most of the time discover data on your network. We actually work closely. We're not trying to necessarily replace a Device 42 or a Landsweeper. The idea is actually we actually have a connector for Landsweeper. We don't have one for Device 42 at the moment, but Data Manager has an adapter for Landsweeper. So you can actually use that as a data source. That's the idea. And what I also suggest to customers is there's kind of there is very much, and I don't want to call it an old school approach to looking at data, but it is kind of that, where many people look at getting data as you have to discover data. I think the idea is with Data Manager is that you've got data already in your environment. Use that data and then look at whether you actually do need a discovery tool. And if you've got a discovery tool already, that's great too. You could just pull that data into Data Manager and then also compare it against all the other data sources that you do have. I'm sorry, I know I'm answering this in a quite long way, but it's pretty important because what tends to happen when you've got even a discovery tool like that Landsweeper or Device 42 is that you don't know whether you're actually scanning everything. And the idea is to use Data Manager to actually compare that data and actually have a look at it. And then you could actually go and do an actionable insight to actually improve whatever the scanning is being done by Data Manager and Landsweeper. I hope that answered the question.
Cool. And then are there any plans to create an adapter or plugin for Ansible?
Ansible, I haven't seen anything on the roadmap at the moment, but I think what the team is really working on is to be able to create the ability to create your own adapter. So that would be, I think that's what the team is working on at the moment. It's very hard for Atlassian, just in general, to create lots and lots of adapters. We're actually looking at, we are going to create new adapters. We'd like to look at ways we can give the ability to create adapters to our partners and our customers. And also, for example, whoever the vendor is that might think that having that data in assets or in Data Manager is a good. So Ansible might go and maybe create an adapter. You can also look at what, for example, like I referred to the SQL adapter, have a look at how you might be able to get that data in the interim into SQL or into a CSV and then import it like that.
Thanks, Mark. And then similarly, AWS, is that kind of a similar answer, or is there any other plans for AWS?
Yeah, so that's probably the biggest one we've seen, that because we have an Azure cloud adapter, but we don't have an AWS one. It's one of our biggest requests from our customers. So that is being worked on by Atlassian at the moment.
Cool. And is there a limit on how much data is captured in Data Manager, and are there plans for incremental cost with volume similar to assets?
Okay, so limits, there are some limits on the number of ingested CIs. It's a little bit complicated because it's not necessarily the number of CIs, it's around how big the data is and how many attributes it is. I can't remember offhand, but I could probably get back to you, Kirsty, and we're about to send out just an explanation of how that works. In terms of charging for Data Manager, no, there's not that I've seen any sort of idea around trying to charge for Data Manager. We charge for the data that is in assets, above 50,000 assets or CIs. So no, there's nothing on the cards for that.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mark. There's no other questions in the queue, but I'll just put it out there to everyone on the call. If anyone wants to ask a question in person, you can click the raise hand and I can open that up for you to ask Mark directly. Last chance to get those burning questions out.
If there aren't any questions and no one, wants to ask as well, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, afterwards, please feel free to email Kirsty or Darren or Brett. I'm happy to answer any of those. Just in terms of how I also work with partners, if you wanted me to actually come into a session with you to have a look at things, I'm also happy to help with that as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure to have you on this webinar. Final plug, take advantage of that consultation time to understand your own situations with your organizations, so that you can get to that point of having complete, current and correct data. Thank you very much for joining. I'm going to end here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.